On behalf of Bakul Foundation, a very warm welcome to everyone out there, whoever is watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Now, you just saw images of the Bakul Library in Satyanagar, Bhubaneswar, and images of various kinds of debates and discussions we used to have at the library. Now, last year when the pandemic hit us, and for some time we thought it's just going to be a matter of time before we reopen, but after it continued, we decided to move our activities online. Right, the library was closed, but the activities did not stop. So we started with some of our regular activities like storytelling. We used to do storytelling from around the world. We resumed it as Storytime at 9, which went live on the same platforms of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. It's going on now. It happens every Saturday at 9 p.m. So if you're interested in listening to the best storytellers from around the world, so we go to different countries. Yesterday, we had gone to Romania. Next Saturday, we'll be going to Costa Rica. So that is something that is happening. You can join in. You can see the previous episodes of Storytime on the channels of YouTube and Facebook in the library. But along with the storytelling, we also started Bakul Talks. Now, the idea was to take up topics of common interest and to an audience that is not only for the uninitiated, but for a general audience. That included book discussions on different topics. Like we had a whole series on the Nobel Prizes of last year. We had another series on the big questions of 2020. And now we are beginning another season. And we're very happy that today we have a wonderful book, the fourth book by an established and eminent poet. And this discussion is being held by many eminent writers, poets, and professors of English from across the country. So let me welcome all of them one by one, and I hope you will enjoy this conversation, and we'll take it from there. So first, I would like to welcome the person for whom this whole show is happening, because it was his book which we are discussing today, Mr. Bishnupada Sethi. Sethi sir, I knew him very briefly as someone who was a close associate of my father and who has written a wonderful tribute to him. But I have been engaging with his work in the writings that he's been doing in different newspapers, and his poetry, which I love. It's his fourth book of poetry, which was inaugurated by the Honorable Chief Minister himself. Congratulations, sir, on your book, and thank you for having this discussion on this platform. The next person I would like to invite is Mr. Bhastrep Sunani, a very eminent contemporary poet from Odisha, and the person who's actually been helping curate this entire session together, putting this session together with all his contacts. So he will be there as well. And the next person I would like to invite is Mr. Shailendra Dwivedi, who is a prolific writer, and he also happens to be the Additional Secretary in the Department of Revenue. Mr. Dwivedi and Mr. Sunani will be taking this discussion forward, really. I won't be there. I'm here just to welcome you. But we have very eminent professors of English from across the country with us. We have Professor Raj Kumar of Delhi University. He's here. He'll be speaking. We have Professor S. Armstrong of the University of Madras. We have Professor M. Dasan of Central University of Kerala. We have Professor Rajesh Karankal of the University of Mumbai, Dr. Prabhakar Palaka of University of Delhi, and Mrs. Anjali Ridlan, who will be joining us shortly. Welcome all of you, sir. And I think over to you, Shailendra sir, to take this discussion forward.
Thank you, Sujit. On behalf of Bakul and on behalf of poet Mr. Bishnupada Sethi, I welcome you all. O God, at gates of peace I do not bow. You are my dwelling place and nesting bough. Your love in my breast burns like doomsday morn. The cry, His God, on my lips is born. Your love makes me God fret with fain and fine. You are the only quest and aim of mine. I started this poetic journey today with Muhammad Iqbal's poetry. It is actually prayer, and the title of the poetry is also prayer. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now start the discussion. And the first of the panelists I am going to introduce is Professor Rajkumar. Professor Rajkumar is one of our distinguished guests today. His areas of interest include Dalit literature, Indian literature, and post-colonial studies. Professor Kumar, who is head of the Department of English, Delhi University, loves teaching, and in fact, to be a teacher was his dream. Education for him is emancipation, and he strongly believes that education will bring transformation in society. Professor Kumar had started his journey long back in Kalahandi, but through his dedication, he has charted a very distinct and bright path of his own. His book, Dalit Personal Narratives, Reading Caste, Nation and Identity, has been published by Orient Blackswan in 2010, and as I know, it has been reprinted several times. He has another book that is Dalit Literature and Criticism, which has also been published by Orient Blackswan. His English translation of Akhila Nayak's Veda, the first Odia Dalit novel, has been published by Oxford University Press. He is committed to subaltern philosophy and is hopeful that one day the world will be a perfect place to live in. I welcome you to discussion, sir. With you, we'll start the discussion on the poetry book of Mr. Bishnupada Sethi, Beyond Here and Other Poems. Please start.
Thank you, Dr. Sailendra Dwivedi. Good evening to everyone. My co-panelists, Professor Armstrong, Professor Dasan, Professor Rajesh, Dr. Prabhakar, Dr. Vasudev, and of course, that the man of today's, event, Mr. Bishnupada Sethi. So first of all, I congratulate Mr. Bishnupada Sethi for his book of poetry titled Beyond Here and Other Poems, which is published by Har Anand, a reputed publisher from Delhi. Thanks also due to Dr. Bhastrep Sunani, who so kindly invited me to be a part of the panel today. In the panel, we have a galaxy of critics, teachers, researchers, poets, and art lovers. I use the word art lover because the idea of art lover, Rasika, that has been a tradition in India. And I'm sure, that with this book, Beyond Here and the Other Poems, will definitely appreciate the work of art today, as, Dr. Sailendra Dwivedi has already announced. I'm privileged to be a part of the event. Poets in all ages need appreciation because, as wordsmiths, they are the pathfinders and keepers of the world. As Seamus Heaney, the Nobel laureate, himself a poet, states in another occasion, and I quote him, "Poets themselves are finders and keepers because their vocation is to look after art and life by being discoverers and custodian of all that which is worth keeping," unquote. So as a discussant, my first and foremost duty is to appreciate the work of art of Bishnupada. But while appreciating Bishnupada's poetry, I will also try to judge. I doubt how much I can judge, but I will try to judge it in a larger Odia Indian literary landscape to a certain extent. I say to a certain extent because as a student of literature, we all know that the scope of poetry is not limited. The canvas of poetry is so vast and complex that sometimes it is difficult to completely comprehend the language of poetry. It is precisely for this reason that Abhinav Gupta, the famous Indian aesthetician, while commenting on poetry in his famous Dhanaloka, states that the soul of poetry is suggestion. So what does Bishnupada's poetry suggest? With this single and yet important question in mind, I will try to interpret a select poem from Beyond Here and Other Poems. Hope I'm able to do some justice to the poetic vision, what the poet has visualized while writing this poetry over the years. I must begin with a confession that before I read Beyond Here and Other Poems, I had not read Vishnupada's poems earlier. I'm so sorry. Being an Odia, you know that this is definitely a sin. I had known him as a civil servant occupying important position in the government of Odisha. And I believe, you know, that he was also collector of my district, Nuapada. And also his devotion to dedication to Mahima Dharma, which originated in Odisha in the mid-19th century to challenge this monopoly of caste in Odisha. This is very important. The second part of the sentence is very important because it was Vishnupad's single-handed, duty to restore Bhimavui's place, particularly, you know, the Khalia Pali, which I have visited because I also happen to be a researcher on Mahima Dharma. So thank you, Vishnupad Babu, for making us actually, you know, that available. Not only, you know, that the resources, you know, that, but also an inspiration for many of us to do further research. It is in this context, you know, that if I make a sense of, you know, that the first sentence that I said, that he is definitely, you know, that in a powerful position, being an IAS officer. Here in Odisha, an IAS officer writing poetry is not uncommon. It is rather a convention. Beginning from Ramakant Ratha, the poet who wrote Sri Radha and became famous, to Sitakant Mahapatra, J.P. Das, to Rajendra Kishore Panda, just to name a few, IAS officer in Odisha have made us proud by writing and publishing poetry regularly. So when I got the proposal from Dr. Bhastrep Sunani, I instantly agreed because I was curious to read Vishnupada's poetry. Reading Beyond Here and Other Poems, I realized that Vishnupad's poetry is very different from the other Odia poets. The poet that I have particularly referred to, the IAS poets, because the latter, by virtue of being in power and position, write a kind of poetry which can be turned as, and these are my, that understanding, I may be wrong, I will turn their poetry as abstract, mythical, unreal, too much imaginary, and also patronizing. On the other hand, Vishnupad's poetry is just their opposite. Concrete, real, contemporary, and down to earth. As the poet himself has stated at the back cover of the book, this is the book that that we are discussing, and at the back cover, if you that read, it says a few lines from the poet himself. These poems are not figments of imagination expressed in words. These are individuals inside the book who are in dialogue with me, unquote. This poetic dialogue makes Vishnupada's poetry interesting and relevant. I say interesting because some of the poems document, that document certain ways of life which are believable and livable. I emphasize here that some of the poems documented here, that they talk about, that what life is to be believed and to believe. As rightly said, seeing is believing. It is through the poet's eye. I don't know, that there is also a third eye, people say, because third eye is what the poet's eye is considered to be. That we see through the world and try to comprehend life beyond this world. I also say relevant because the world we live in is so fragmented due to narrow-mindedness, prejudice, selfish interest, hatred that it is difficult to imagine love, friendship, fellow feeling, and brotherhood, and also, of course, sisterhood among human beings. Vishnupada is a poet of hope. I emphasize here, Vishnupada is a poet of hope. He finds a simple solution to life's problem when we whisper to all of us saying, and I quote him, the life's lessons are simple. Please, that these are very interesting things, that he's writing about. The life's lessons are simple. Time runs out before you notice. Few moments of love, a fistful of happy memories make up the full worth of one's life. Unquote. This is in page number 122 of this book. This simple philosophy of life has been once profoundly propagated by Buddha, Kabir, Bhimabhui, Ravidas, and not to forget Gandhi, Ambedkar, Karl Marx, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela, to just name a few. I'm really happy, that the way Bishnupada Sethi writes, what he writes, that the simple philosophy of life, which he finally says that this is a life full worth of one's life, that full of worth living. So I am reminded of, that Buddha, I must, emphasize here, who wanted to have an egalitarian society in India way back in 4th century BC. Kabir, another great poet of Bhakti Center, the tradition, who talk about city of love, Prem Nagari, that is the term he used. Our Bhimabhoi, whom, that Vishnupad admires and maybe, that celebrates. Ravidas or Raidas, both are the same, who envisages a world, that no caste, no class, no gender discrimination, whom he calls it Begumpura. And our own Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who talks about enlightened India. I was tempted to also bring Kancha Ilaya Safad here, who talks about post-Hindu India, but that I dare not, because there is, that all of a sudden maybe, that taking a name and not being able to maybe explain, that doesn't make sense. So, that the simple philosophy that Vishnupada, that writes about in his, that simple way is a larger, that life, that many of us we have heard about, the that so, be it social reformer, saint poets like Kabir, Nanak, maybe that Raidas, politicians, and of course that many others have already that thought about, acted upon, and then that work for a betterment of society. But what is common among them all about, that the name that I talk about, each one of them worked to build up a society free from all kinds of vices, be it pertaining to caste, class, race, ethnicity, language, gender, religion, and nationalism. It is perhaps for this reason that in the preface of the book, preface of Beyond Here and Other Poems, Harprasad Das, an Odia literature, terms Vishnupada's poetry as the poetry of substance, and he's quite right by telling so. So finally, that we can call Vishnupada's poetry as the poetry of substance. The 61 poems included in the book are quite diverse in themes, approaches, and of course diction. Written in a simple and eloquent English, and that I'm really happy that Vishnupad is writing in English, because there are, of course, that Odia and Indian poets writing in English, but maybe very few from Odisha. So congratulations for that also. Written in a simple and eloquent English, the poems guide us to a tour to the lens and bilence of life and death. But between life and death, the poet also talks about love, longing, friendship, belonging, hope, despair, illusion, reason, science, freedom, God, devotion, faith, festivals, celebration, and so on. These are some of the, the selected maybe, the theme, and many more, of course, that he talks about. This illustration of life as well as death. And death here, I mean, that not just physical, but he refers to death in moral sense, mental, metaphysical. For example, death of a dream. So what does, the poet talk about death of a dream? So the illustration of life and life as well as death imply that as if the poet is in a tour to discover life. He is constantly in a tour. I see him as a traveler of life, whereby he can just discover life. It's just like Buddha, that going for 14 years to get his enlightenment. In the process, the poet is at times mediative, at other time he is normal, ordinary, earthly, and very subjective. Maybe a few illustrations from his book will prove this point. The poet believed that life is great gift. This is page number 83. So one should do good, be kind to others. I'm quoting from his own, that poem. Do good, be kind to others. The poet believed that life is great gift, so one should do good, be kind to others. As the simple philosophy of life is, if you are good to others, the world will be good. I'm really thankful to Bishnupad having reminded us once and again in many of his poems. But since the life is not always at peace, the soul in our body is always restless to get released from the mundane body. I don't want to bring here the discourse of Bhagavad Gita, whereby that there is a constant tussle between body and soul. Krishna telling Arjuna that the soul is immortal, eternal, etc., etc. Of course, there is a faint, maybe that philosophical, the reflection of it in Vishnupad poetry, but I dare not bring this issue here. So the poet writes, and I quote, that from page number 65. This is the title of the poem is "Keep Singing." So nice, keep singing, and yet a great philosophy. He says the soul, this is from page number 65. The soul seeks a passage to escape the barriers. The soul seeks a passage to escape the barriers of time and relationship. Ask for a new definition of life, its purposes. Look at the, that if I can emphasize here, the passage of time and life are going parallel just to seek the definition of life. But the poet knows that the purpose of life is to be content and to be at peace with this world, because one cannot live a life of constant, that fight, tension, and that's where one has to be at peace, or at least the agreement of that life to be at peace. And therefore, therefore the poet sings a song. This singing is a, that I use the word sing because that it is song of life, whereby that if I can quote the poet, the song is life. This is very interesting. The song is life, the life is a song, you are the lyrics. a beautiful mother wrote and who inspired to live a wonderful life. So this is where, that the poet constantly gets inspiration from life, because life has to be made beautiful, and that's where one has to sing the song of life. Must I say here that it is not so much in his meditative poems, but in the poems of his mundane everyday existence that Vishnupada comes alive. Because in meditative poems, certain philosophical moorings, certain philosophical, maybe, that understandings are required, and that's why his meditative poem becomes at times, that of course for a common and ordinary readers it will be difficult. One has to actually, that tend to understand about the philosophy of life. But as I said, in its mundane, that the poems of his mundane everyday existence, that he comes alive. And when I mean by, that what I mean by alive is definitely, the down to earth, very simple, outspoken, and as I said little while before, very, very subjective, so that we can understand him in a way he understands life. So, that there are few examples that I can give, be it his love for his beloved. What I mean by mundane life is, that the everyday life existence, not so much philosophical moorings. Be it his love for life, beloved, uh, be it his love for his beloved, or tribute to his little daughter, or his longing for the old bicycle, that the poetic persona looks vulnerable. I use the word vulnerable, as the very autobiographical self glares through the poetic passages and questions the time gone by. As the poet traverses through a different time and space, he is now ready to embrace life of the present. So he's thinking of the past, as Bishnupada Sethi has already, that traveled over the years. His longing for certain things in life has to be understood as not only just evaluation of life, but his predicament, where he belongs to. I will now, quote from three of his poems. That first, to his beloved, for example. This is, page number 43, where he talks about, this is, the title is Garland in My Cupboard. Very interesting. Toward the end of this poem, it says, I must admit. So look at the word, that as I was telling you, that he lives in the present, of course, thinking about the past. And that's where his admission, maybe, that to his, it could be his belief or faith or hope or desire, is so great that he writes few lines that he thinks would be beneficial after he passes away. There are several places, the reference to death. So life and death actually, that go side by side in many of his poems. I was just counting, maybe, that there are 6 or 7 places, that's celebrating life, at least, that life, the word life is celebrating, and at least in 2 or 3 places, death. Yeah, I'll just, that I'll quickly wrap up, because, the time is perhaps, that coming to an end. So the first is, to beloved, I must admit, through everything did not come as a blessing to our life, yet I recount all the beautiful moments. Each of those is a jasmine flower that you like. I'm making a beautiful garland and hiding in my cupboard with a request, if you could place on me while I take up the life's last journey. Or maybe, that a small tribute to his daughter, which is page number 29. how lucky have I been to have a daughter, lively and pretty. She's a blessing from the heavens, cheering all the way and making life so full. Or his yearning for his old bicycle. This is very interesting because I also used to have a bicycle earlier. Now, of course, that we are riding cars. And that's where this yearning for a bicycle, small, that little thing of life. And he writes, decades have passed since I searched for my bicycle or any other thing in life that gave so much excitement and joy. Now, the poet has also written about Gandhi and the recent corona pandemic. About Gandhi, he echoes what Albert Einstein had once stated earlier, decades, that meaning long back. So I just, that quote few lines maybe. Decades later, we wonder if it was not a miracle he walked around here being in flesh and blood. So this equals Einstein. And of course, that he also quotes in two lines from the same poem, in the same poem, Ahimsa, whereby he quotes, that Gandhian philosophy saying there is enough for everyone to meet the needs on earth. About Corona, of course, that he writes about two things. One is, that how the pandemic has brought, that complete silence in, that everyone's life. And of course, that he being a, that poet is, that he likes to maybe, that see us, what he observes, like, the roads in front of my house appear wide long. No vehicles are at sight. The silence is eerie. Seldom the sirens of ambulance puncturing it. But what is most important about his, that observation about the pandemic, that how human beings, as we all know about, we have, that turn to become a new human being. No, some of us have become selfish to the sense that that we want to live a life amidst death, because second wave, that have made us has made up actually that a run for life. So he said, that they seem in the, this is actually no one is greeting, no one is smiling, another human may be carrying the virus. So, that there are two kinds of human beings we can see during pandemic. One is, that selfish, brutish life, that during pandemic. Another is, of course, that um, charitable, volunteering, that even at the cost of death. So I conclude, that there are many things because time is short. So, that I must conclude. So life with this difficult time, because now, that since the last poem that I read is, the pandemic and corona, and the third wave is at the corner, and life, that as such, it's difficult to live in during this, maybe, the pandemic. What can we say as a conclusion to Bishnupad's poem? What matters today is humanity at large. That is the conclusion I can think about. And this is possible only when we come together, like this book discussion we have come together today. So just to conclude, I'll just, that say two lines from the poet himself, whereby he suggests, and this is my conclusion: in this beautiful universe, there is nothing more important than the time of togetherness we have at our disposal. Thank you all for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajkumar. We are actually indebted to you for your great talk. And as you told very perfectly that Bishnupada's poetry is all about very mundane, very simple things about everyday existence. There is nothing so abstract about that like other poems. And you also said that there is a tremendous beauty in his poems. Give me the flute and sing. Immortality lies in a song. And even after we have perished, the flute continues to lament. Have you taken refuge in the woods, away from places like me, followed streams on their courses, and climbed up the rocks? This is from Khalil Gibran's Give Me the Flute. And with this, I introduce Professor Armstrong, who is head of the Department of English and chairperson, School of English and Foreign Languages, University of Madras. He is recipient of Fulbright Nehru Visiting Associate Professorship at the University of California. He has authored Voices of the Voiceless, Canadian Native Women's Autobiographies, and has edited 3 books, Survivance Beyond Canons, Mapping Canadian Literature, Multicultural Inclusivity in Literacy and Social Media, Critical Explorations in Canadian Literature. He has authored several critical essays which have received critical acclaim. He is currently member of Fellowship Committee, Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, and coordinator of Language Laboratories, Foreign Language Labs and Center for Canadian Studies, as well as Center for Australian Studies at University of Madras. I would welcome you, sir. Please start the discussion.
Thank you, sir. Respected Shailendra Dwivedi, Sujit Mahapatra, dear professors, Rajkumar, Professor Dasan, Professor Rajesh Karankal, Professor Palaka, beloved poet Bhastrep Sunani, and friends and guests. Good afternoon and good evening to you all. This is a great opportunity for me to be part of this book review event. I always remember Professor Rajkumar, poet Vasudev, and our Bishnupada Sethi as 3 pillars of Odia, because Bishnupada Sethi sir is known for his creativity and administration. Rajkumar is known for his scholarship and a lot of teaching, academic teaching in India. And Professor Vasudev, poet, is known for his creativity and friendship. These 3 pillars can create a lot of transformation in Odia and also in India. With this note, I am very happy to be part of this book discussion event, Beyond Here and Other Poems. In India, we need poets like Bishnupada Sethi. The reason is very few writers write in English language. And many professors in India who teach in universities and colleges find no time to write poems. And I am very happy. I congratulate Bishnupada Sethi for bringing out his 4th book, not the first book. This is the 4th book, I think, Beyond Here and Other Poems, for the benefit of not only readers, common readers. I am sure this book will be useful for students and also faculty across universities in India. I noted 3 important critical. I just want to give my critical review. I don't want to give a simple reading of the poetry book. I found 3 important components in this book. Sorry, I may sound a little bit theoretical, but I want to understand this book in my own perspective. Number 1. Memory seems to be one of the important components. Memory in this world is a weapon not only for the marginalized. The memory is also an important weapon for all people in this world. In that background, I see in the poetry of Bishnupada Sethi 3 types of memory, I can say. Number 1, communicative memory. Written in ordinary language, he wanted to bring out a memory which is based on communication. So communicative memory, I can see. The second type of memory I wish to mention here is collective memory. It is not only communicative memory. Sethi sir is also interested in recording collective memory. That's the second type of memory I want to mention. The third type of memory is his own personal memories, his own personal memories. Professor Rajkumar quoted the poem on bicycle, which I consider that is one of the examples for recording his own individual memory. For the memory, for the collective memory, I can quote an example from his poem in page number 17 at the end. This poem opens with, I quote, "At the end, it is now some memories of pain and pleasure. You walked away as it was so easy for you." So this memory is very, very important. I see this an example for collective memory. Memory also reminds all of us to remember everything, to forget everything. Forgetting and also remembering are combined in memories. So this poem is an example for that. So it's not only memory, which I pointed out, three types of memory, that communicative memory, collective memory, and individual memory. The next important component that I can visualize in this poem is this poetry collection is a reflection of three types of consciousness, I can say. Number one, ecological consciousness. There are a lot of poems related to nature, poems about rain, poems about breeze. All these poems remind me about the ecological consciousness of our poet. The second type of consciousness that I can see in this poetry book is spatial consciousness. Now, the space is one of the important themes in this book. The space here is not a narrow space. The space here, there is no limit. The sky is a space. The earth is a space. The sea is the space for our poet. So the spatial consciousness is also one of the important types of consciousness that I see in this book. The third type of consciousness I see in this book is, societal consciousness. There is a kind of consciousness, there is a kind of longing for a society with equity, a society with no discrimination. So that kind of understanding is there in the poetry of our poet. I can quote page number 115 in this book. There's a poem about wounds. The title of the poem, Wounds, page number 115. Our poet ends this poem with this stanza. I quote, "Several layers of wounds lie, all unhealed." I can speak a lot about these two lines. Several layers of wounds lie, all unhealed. The wound is known for healing, but our poet talks about unhealed wounds. That is very powerful. Unhealed wounds may refer to so many things in the Indian context. One over the other. One over the other. Not all could be from this life. Filling up the conscious, filling up the conscious and unconscious mind and haunting the living ones. That is very powerful. The wounds that made for others haunt everybody. That is the beauty of this poem. Quietly from time to time. The wound has no healing. The wound is unhealable. It is eternal. The eternal wound is there for majority of the people in India. The unhealed wounds is really a significant symbol in my understanding of sport. That is the spatial, that is the societal consciousness that I can see in this sport. It is not only that, he packs his emotions. We always remember Shelley in his defense of poetry. He says, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Not only that, Shelley also says, I remember, I quote Shelley from his defense of poetry again and other essays and analysis. I quote, poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar. The wound is familiar, but what is not familiar is the unhealed wound. I always remember Keats' unheard song. Unheard music is sweeter than the heard music. But our Sethi sir says unhealed wounds. This is the aesthetics I see in this poetry. The next component I would like to highlight in this analysis is aesthetics. What types of aesthetics? What are the important types of aesthetics? There are so many aesthetics I can see in this book. What are the major aesthetics I can see is a lot. I also see a combination of 5 types of imageries that are embedded in this aesthetics. I can say there is aesthetics of visual aesthetics. Lot of poems are related to sight. I can see all these 5 types of imageries in the poems of Keats, John Keats. Same thing I can visualize in the poetry of Sethi. Not only the visual imagery in the poetry of Sethi, auditory images are there. There are sounds echo. There is the sounds of the breeze, sounds of rain. You can see in the poetry. It's not only hearing imagery, the imagery of the tactile imagery is there. You can touch and feel the poetry of Sethi in this book. The cover design in this book is one of the important images that I can speak a lot. The cover design is very, very, very much related to the thematic structure of the poetry. It's not only the aesthetics of tactile is there. There is also taste, gustatory. Lot of images related to taste is also mentioned in this book. The type of imagery that I can see is olfactory imagery, where the smell is there. These are the important imageries that I can see in this book. The aesthetics of touch, aesthetics of smell, aesthetics of taste, aesthetics of sound, and then the aesthetics of sight. All these things are all embedded in the poetry of Sethi. It is not only memory, consciousness, and aesthetics are differently embedded in this poetry book. I see a kind of creative use of symbols in this poetry. The important symbols that I can see in this poetry is in the poem Ashes, Charcoal, and Identities. I consider this is one of the powerful poems in this book. In page number 15, Sethi says, ashes, charcoal, and identities. Each word in the title is very, very powerful. Ash, charcoal, identity. There is hill, there is chill, more in the air than usual. The night appeared heavier, I quote, though the nearby landmass was duty bound to cool the heated sea. Like unhealed wound, can anyone imagine a heated sea? Sea, this is one of the examples for oxymoron, I can say. A sea which is always, full of wind and coldness, here is mentioned as heated sea. But the rule here is broken. Broken rules, heated sea, unhealed wounds. There are no other phrases than these three in this world to express the psyche of a person who has undergone a lot of sufferings in this world. The sands have darkened where I searched for the dreams of my ancestors. Again, memory here. Within those fine charcoals and the moisture in the air. This is the beauty of this poem. This poem is a combination of consciousness, memory, and aesthetics. And I always remember the phoenix symbol that is indirectly embedded in this poem. Phoenix is a bird which is, as Rajkumar pointed out, this is known for life and death. Phoenix, it dies and it gets life from the ashes. So the word the word in the title ashes echo the phoenix symbol in this poem. And charcoal is a symbol of Indian society, I can say. And identity in this world, and for particularly Indian, is very, very important. The identity is broken. Charcoal is packed. Ashes, are buried. This is the beauty of this poem: ashes, charcoal, and identities. It is not. The poetry is always filled with deep symbols and deep images. It relates with each one who reads this poem. Emotional connectivity, like joy, love, victory, loss, fear, separation, are all parts and parcel of life. It's not only the ordinary, experiences. The poet becomes a sculptor. I quote the poet from his own book, like a sculptor who attempts to chisel out a statue from a raw stone. Sethi creates individuals in each poem who are in dialogue with him. So this dialogue is very, very important. And finally, I wish to state, Sethi sir is not an engineer or an administrative officer with the United Nations award, but a great promoter of Mahima philosophy, as Rajkumar pointed out, and mystic poetry. This rare combination of Mahima philosophy, mystic poetry into the aesthetics of the poetic world will be totally different from the poetry of other poets who wrote and who are writing right now in India. As T.S. Eliot spoke about Dante, I quote, "It is a test that genuine poetry can communicate before it is understood." Sethi sir's poems are can be considered as a kind of an example for this quote of T.S. Eliot and then Dante. With this note, Considering the time shortage, I thank organizers for giving lot of importance to this event for the analysis of the poetry book titled Beyond Here and Other Poems. And I thank Vasudev Sunani for the opportunity, and all of you for your patient listening. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Professor Armstrong told us two important dimensions of Vishnupada's poetry. And the first one that touched me, and it has touched much earlier also, touch and feel his poems. And you will feel the difference. You will see the world within, the sky within. And Professor Armstrong also told us about the wounds unhealed, that ultimate divine and eternal dimension of poetry that you'll find in Vishnupada's poems. There is a thirst within. I don't get tired of you. Don't grow weary of being compassionate towards me. All this thirst equipment must surely be tired of me. The water jar, the water carrier, I have a thirsty fish in me that can never find enough of what it is thirsty for. Show me the way to the ocean. Break these half measures, these small containers, all this fantasy and grief. With this, I would introduce Professor Rajesh Karankal, who is Associate Professor, University Department of English, University of Mumbai. Educating students in a proper manner remains his priority. Professor Rajesh has over 20 years of experience of teaching English and related subjects, which include Indian writings in English, Dalit literature, literature in translation, American literature, drama and art of the theater, communication skills, mass communication, business communication, and advertising. In short, I find a rainbow unto himself. Professor Karankal has published 3 books: Pioneers of Discourse of Resistance in India, Countercultural Discourse and Dalit Literature in India, and Cultural Dimensions of Novels of Kamala Markandeya. I would welcome you, sir, Professor Karankal, to take up the discussion ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Dwivedi Saab. I am very happy to join this discussion of an important personality in not only administration, but also in the cultural life of India, that is literature. Honorable Bishnupada Sethi Sahab, Honorable Professor Dasan, Professor Armstrong, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Prabhakar, my very, very dear friend, Honorable Sunani ji, Honorable Anjali ji, and others who are watching us on live media. Let me confess that I have read something very, very special after the book was sent to me by Honorable Sunani ji. We have been teaching literature for the last almost 20-25 years. What happens of late is something which is unusual is read and appreciated as part of trends in modernism, as well as the emerging trends in postmodernism, so far poetry writing is concerned. Therefore, I said, let me confess that I have read and appreciated a lot of poets like Nisi Musical, K.K. Daruwala, Jain Mahapatra, and so many others. But in the last 20 years, what has happened is, being a student and a scholar of Dalit cultural studies, I've been always reading, writing, and also discussing about in the classroom also about the anger of a poet, the protest of a poet, the uneasiness in the life of a poet. While doing this, what was actually forgotten was, for me personally, as a student, as a scholar, that we did not read anything very as subtle a protest, as subtle a comment as Honorable Vishnupada Sethi is making through his poetry. We are busy so much with the protest and anger in the poet who is shaping and getting shaped in the modern environment, which is troubling him. Something which Jain Mahapatra wrote seemed to me as something which became thing of the past, which was modernity once upon a time. But now with Vishnupada Sethi, even in modernity as well as in the post-modernity, I see and I read something that Mahapatra writes like. In Dalit writings, in women's writings, in the postmodernist writing, we see a different kind of countering of the aesthetics of the dominant, oppressive mainstream. When we read that, we see that a poet is talking for himself as well as is talking for his people, for his community, for his suffering masses. So he has been able to, or they have been able to create a kind of divide between massical as well as and the classical. But now, when I read Beyond Here and other poems by Vishnupada Sethi, I remember Jain Mahapatra again. I remember Nissim Ezekiel again, because these poems are extremely personal. Most of these poems, let me also make it very clear that I have not read so many other books that Sethi has penned. Now, this book I got to know, and therefore I really appreciate that, which I think Dr. Rajkumar said, that a lot of people who are from the non-Oriya background, those who do not know the Oriya literature, especially towards the southern part of the country, have not really got any opportunity to read the other books written by Vishnupada Sethi. But now with this book coming up, and that too in English, I'm thankful to him that a new trend possibly would be known to the people in the southern part of this country. Therefore, personal feelings of joy, happiness, sorrow, love, and especially the romantic love that he hibernates is a very, very important point in this book. Now, there are around 5 things that I have noted about these poems, which are contained in the anthology entitled Beyond Here and Other Poems. Now, let me also tell one more thing, that the critics and the professors before me, Professor Armstrong and Professor Rajkumar, they have already spoken about a few things that I wanted to speak about, and therefore I will not repeat those things. What is not repeated would be my preoccupation with in the next few minutes. And since very little time is, I'm reading the messages, so I can understand. I limit myself to the shortest possible time that I take on this. Now, romantic poetry, not only about oneself, but then here what happens is, because there is some kind of mysticism in the poetry, it is very difficult to point out whether these poems are the feelings of the poet himself, or the poet is writing as every man. And therefore there is a possibility, and a very, very strong possibility, that the poet is every man, and he stands for every man. Okay, so there is immense possibility at his command as a bureaucrat of a very, very high caliber to be positive about a lot of things. Because as a bureaucrat, he is changing the lives of several people, millions of people around him. But he cannot do that unless he's positive about the change. The moment somebody becomes frustrated with certain things, then you really cannot expect a lot of positivity through him. Now I can understand somebody like Mr. Bishnupada Sethi, who has been dealing with innumerable problems of the people around him all the time. Even then, he has not lost sight of his mission to change the lives. And therefore, he is keeping the cheer. He is still keeping the positivity to make a change to the lives of the people. And that positivity in his approach is very much visible in his poetry. It is so difficult to have somebody write a poem with which this anthology begins. Now, if you look at this first, a fulfilling sense, that actually gives you a sense of a romantic poem. Now, I would like to read this poem fully, and please bear with me even if it takes 2 minutes more. Under the clear open sky, while countless stars gazed quietly and were pouring their energy kindly, in the midst of unknown people, unmindful of others' existence, we met as two breathing shadows. Two heated minds, both the charged bodies, talked in the ancient language of intimate bonding. The story had begun at first of our meetings. A timeless hidden park was in the waiting till then to ignite. Two homeless wandering souls, separated by the long spell of time, place and birth, fell for each other at their first sight. No one will name this story ever, as we couldn't be writing anywhere. The love will simply evaporate in the air like the dew on the green leaves, and the cover of night's darkness and our footprints in the avenue. We live with our feelings, the most precious treasures hidden inside. The fervor of our love is fulfilling sense. It prompts a perpetual smile on our lips. The eye wings uncover the beautiful islands of our hearts, only discovered by both of us. There are two aspects I find as a scholar, as a student of this poem, is that he is writing on a very, very everyday common theme in the romantic poetry, just like William Shakespeare. At the same time, he in a subtle way points out the feelings of John Donne when John Donne meets his beloved. Of course, the metaphysics is a little different than this, but there is some kind of link which is there, I find as a student of this poem. And therefore, the sensitive poet who is romantically extremely sensitive in his personal relationship with someone, and who remembers and is able to pen down those feelings in the most delicate words that he finds at his command to express his touching feelings, romantic feelings, very, very warmth that somebody can have for his beloved. At the same time, he is extremely concerned about the plight of a common man. If you look at this anthology has poems of multiple themes. Usually what many poets do is they write anthologies according to the themes on which the poems are structured and they are composed, and then according to the title of that particular anthology, poems are grouped. But in this case, there are multiple themes. So he is writing about himself, he is writing about his intimate moments, he is writing about the world around him, he is writing about the world around him shaping himself. At the same time, he is writing about and also contemplating about things around him and issues around him. He is also writing about the people around him. Very, very important. He is not unmindful of anything. And it is to those people around him that the book is dedicated, and the names of these people is are Vaishali, Mahima, and Alek. Now, therefore, if any student has to conclusively write about these poems, critical analysis, then one has to. I will rather request some scholars or even my scholars to interview this poet and find out a little more about his personal life, so that his personal life will be able to enlighten the mystical corners which are expressed in these poems. And therefore, this sensitive soul is also touched by not only romantic feelings, but also touched by the saddest plight of a common man, even during the lockdown. And therefore, I say that he becomes every man, and every man's suffering becomes his own. And there, when you read the poem, you realize that he has taken on himself the role of a common man. The man who is locked down in the lockdown and is suffering. I read, do not ask someone else how much it hurts when one feels the pain due to hunger or bad times. Not a day or weeks few, all belongings I possess, I carry. My feet give me the strength, the head and shoulder support. My family and I move miles and miles over the years in search of work, food, and rest. Not sure if I remember the year and month. Sunrise and sunset guide my day. I continue the journey, unmindful of cyclone and flood, brought an epidemic drive me further away. My feet are bare, little clothes I do wear, heat and rain and cold, all the extreme weather hurt me and be numb. The extreme despair benumbs the sensitive poet. He becomes every man and every man's problems, every man's predicaments, every man's sorrows, every man's helplessness becomes his own. And that is something that makes a poet universal individual. He is for all, and all people's feelings are his own. He does not remain individual in this sense. And the poem ends, and he says, I rise to go. The earth below and the sky above give me a call and fill my mind with strength. My dear ones need to smile and grow. There in Marathi, the Bhakti poet Naneshwara has translated Bhagavad Gita, of course in his own tradition, because Naneshwara was a Brahmin poet in Maharashtra, but a stigmatized Brahmin, remember, because he was in touch with the non-Brahminical society, suffering masses of the non-Brahminical locations. And therefore, the Brahmins in Maharashtra had actually outcast him those days. And he, when he actually translated Bhagavad Gita, at the end, he asks for a prayer for the welfare of humanity. And it is called Pasayadan. In Marathi, he says, Duritancheti mere javo, Vishwa swadharma surya paho, jo je vanchil to te laho, prani jate. Let everybody get what he or she wants. And therefore he says, my dear ones need to smile and grow. Let everybody be smiling and let everybody grow. At the same, there are multiple meanings. It can be interpreted this way. At the same time, it can also mean that I wouldn't carry the burden back home if I'm able to give solace to the masses. Okay, this is a wonderful introspection of life. So he has written about people. He has written about issues. He has written about his own intimate personal experiences, his own romantic encounters, and one cannot do that unless one actually hibernates, one actually introspects. And therefore, soul searching is the soul of his poetry. He has always been soul searching, not only as a bureaucrat. He has always been introspecting as a bureaucrat, but he has been soul searching as a welfare minded human being, a wonderful human being. And therefore, the life under the light of the teachings of the great social reformers, his life, his soul searching, his introspection, all this is happening under the light of the teachings of the great social reformers, whom Dr. Rajkumar also mentioned. And therefore, I'm saying, see, my job became really difficult, because the points which I felt about the poetry, about this book, have actually some of these points were actually raised by the earlier scholars, and I thank them for doing that. That means what I think and feel about these poems is something which is commonly understood by other contemporary scholars. Third, the fourth important point about this book is I find these poems extremely autobiographical. They have this autobiographical significance, and therefore I said that he must give interviews so that the people who study these poems in different universities, and I'm sure this book could be part of the Bombay University syllabus after the next 2 years. Had I got this book little earlier, we were actually searching for some good poet of this kind, but never. It is never too late. The students in this part of the country would be eagerly receiving these poems very soon. What is another important part of this poem, of this anthology, is, as Dr. Armstrong has rightly pointed out, that there is olfactory aspect here. The book cover is extremely catchy. It is actually summing the major themes of the poems inside. And if you see, there is a garland inside. Now, I don't know whether I should call it a garland or not, because garland actually means a very, very big string of flowers which people use to welcome the person who is a guest, or sometimes even they exchange garlands when they get married. But there is a small string of flowers which women wear around their bows or buns or hair, that and the smell is extremely a very, very important part of that object. So that has become visible here. The blank verse, which is part of the modernity and the postmodernity, is used by the poet. That means, though I spoke in the beginning that these poems are different from the poems that we have been reading these days, and the poems of protest, the poems of anger, the poems of rejection, the poems of isolation, the poems of countering the mainstream dominant hegemonic discourse, this book also in a very, very subtle way rejects the dominant mainstream aesthetics. Now, these poems reject the mainstream dominant hegemonic aesthetics of poetry, and therefore Dr. Bishnupada Sethi ji actually is using blank verse. There are a lot of lines which are only 4-word lines, and there is a full stop. The complete sentence is over. Okay. So every line, every single line is a sentence. That is one of the important feature of the poems in this book, and therefore he is able to maintain his modernity as well as post-modernity together. That is so glaringly very, very obvious. And then the last observation that I would like to make, and that is, this book, Beyond Here, signifies time and space. The theme that connects both time and space is one's journey of life. And therefore, the metaphor of journey is very, very strongly present in most of the poems available in this anthology. Life itself is a journey in the time and space and even beyond. Now, this theme is reflected in many of his poems. Of course, I did speak about pandemic. and Beyond the Lockdown is the poem. The title suggests the pandemic lockdown is behind this poetic inspiration, and he actually takes on himself. There is an empathy in this poem, and he speaks as if he is going through the entire trouble, helplessness, that the labor walking on the roads, going back home with their families, children on shoulders, children on their backs, children on their suitcases, okay, and lot of luggage on their heads is being carried. And what is more touching about this poem is the last few lines. He says, "I rise to go, the earth below and the sky above give me a call, and fill my mind with strength. My dear ones need to smile and grow." Of course, he writes on mother. He writes about his beloved. He writes the beloved could be his beloved, could be his wife. He writes about daughter. And then there is another important poem that I find, and that the title of the poem is Garland in My Cupboard. Now, in this poem, the word "you" stands for the beloved of the poet persona, probably the poet himself. Each joyful moment spent with his beloved is like a jasmine flower. The olfactory image is very, very strong here, which is full of sweet fragrance. And he says, each of those a jasmine flower that you like, I am making a beautiful garland and hiding in my cupboard, with a request, if you could place on me while I take up the life's last journey. This is an extremely touching poet, touching poem, and his lines are the memorable lines in this poem. With this, I end my discussion. I thank you, Sunani ji. I thank you, Sethi ji, for inviting me here to give my observations about the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rajesh, for your great words, as you have described very simply and very appropriately that the poems of Mr. Bishnupada Sethi are poems of love, poems of loss, poems of protest, and at the same time poems of prayer and faith. Before introducing Madam Anjali, I would like to read a few lines of a poem of Mr. Sethi. He exists at phase 51. Decades later now, often hearing something unpleasant, or at irregular times, I would hear the same voice, feeble though, there is nothing to worry, my son, for there is God. He has his hands upon you, like I held your hands once, and he knows his job well, never to feel low or let down. Have your faith on him. Trust me, he exists. Nothing could be there without his wish. I would now speak a few lines about Madam Anjali Ridlan, who is Assistant Professor at the Department of English, Dayal Singh College, University of Delhi. She has been a brilliant student all along, loves poetry. And as you know, friends, a recital is one of the most important parts of a poetry book celebration. I would request you, Madam, to recite a few poems very poignantly.
Thank you so much, sir. And first of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude towards the respected panelists for their inspiring presence and all the participants who have made this event a successful one. Thank you so much for giving me this platform today. I will be reading out a few poems from this beautiful book of poetry, Beyond Here and Other Poems, by the poet Bishnupada Sethi, sir. The poems in this collection seem to provide the reader with a profound perspective on life as they talk about life as a journey with all its experiences of pains and pleasures. They seem to suggest that no matter what situation you are in, the ray of hope and possibility of finding love can always be the one guiding light for everyone. Each poem is unique and deeply philosophical, as pointed out by the respected panelists earlier. I would like to read out one such poem from the collection titled Before You Walk Away. And here it is. Before you walk away. It's a storm, very rare. Here from the ocean it roars, rising from deep inside while tall trees are swinging in the air. The objects are flying hither, thither. The nests birds made are gone. Nothing as it appears will remain. End of the world nearing. The feeble-hearted was heard saying. Look at that little girl in the hut of a wise farmer, trying to save the lamp glowing, providing a hand cover in the house corner, dispelling darkness away. She's quite aware of the storm's power. Look back before you leave if you must. Think of giving love chance another. No storm will last forever. What you do now will decide the future. However hard you may try, none could run the clock backwards. Neither will you be the young again, nor your fresh beginnings can recreate the same innocent feelings to pour all your life's spaces. You may hold back to what you have now. Lying low is little wise, at times not so bad. How do we look at a burnt limb of body if one is to live with it? Before all old memories are blackened and you walked out of the problems now, you may give love another chance and allow the healings to start the cover the wounds as the storm blows over. Likewise, some other poems seem to be depicting poets' resilient and positive attitude towards life. In one of his poems, he writes, "Fire won't burn me anymore. Storms don't blow me away. Mighty ocean does hardly scare. No sharp object could pierce into me. No force could harm me again. I have risen above all such pain." These lines are from the poem titled Feeling Ecstatic. This is how it begins. There is profusion of light. The heat and cold are absent. I don't feel any need to see through the eyes. My body and limbs are dissolved. I don't hear any voice. I lost my speech, my hunger and thirst. These senses are no more required and have gone numb. I don't need to breathe. Fire won't burn me anymore. Storms don't blow me away. Mighty ocean does hardly scare. No sharp object could pierce into me. No force could harm me again. I have risen above all such pain. I am nameless. I have no form. There is an ecstasy in the complete absence of any pain. A bountiful joy surrounds. I keep flying over, here, there, everywhere, over a unique dimension. The past, present, and the future merge together. The poet, going beyond the earthly experiences, reaches this state of ecstasy. And empathy is another dominant theme in these poems. There is this strong urge, the poet has a strong urge to connect with the present times and the people around. The poem Beyond the Lockdown is one example of that. Professor Karankal already read it and, rendered it so beautifully. I would like to read another poem which has same theme of empathy, titled For a Bereaved Mother, that has feelings for a mother. And this is how the poet writes. He can hide behind the darkness. He can merge within the light rays. He can take any hue of the tree leaves, may it be any color of the sky or the ocean, to match with their pigments, in no issue with him now. You knew him so much. It did matter a little whether he was here and there, and so familiar were you with his contours. You are the greatest artist ever known. You created him, sustained him all throughout, from the time he was only an egg till he grew up so big. Now you can take a pen, use the sky or the ocean, shade of darkness or the patch of light rays, or the tree trunk or any empty space. As a canvas, draw him as you wish, a toddler, a teenager, an adult in prime youth, or any form you remember. Feel him, he's here, on the clouds, in the sky, on the ocean, on the treetops, over the hills and meadows, and wherever reaches your eyes and mind. He was here and there. He's everywhere. And now I would like to read out one of the most encouraging poems also, which has a very beautiful message in it. It is titled, Keep Singing. Keep singing, my nightingale, for this life is a song, and you sing so well. Keep singing, my nightingale, for this life is a song, and you sing so well. When you sing, many listen to the lyrics and rhythm. I feel mesmerized. The voice pierces my heart's ear. A butterfly runs amok. Through these vibrations, it runs here and there. The soul seeks a passage to escape the barriers of time and relationship, asks for a new definition of life, its purposes. The song is life. The life is a song. You are the lyrics a beautiful mother wrote and who inspired to live a wonderful life. So these are the few poems that I wanted to read out, and this is all. I hope.
Thank you, Anjali Madam. You made it beautiful. The recital is the core of the poetry, and you proved it perfect. Thank you so much. Now, at the time interaction, for the interaction, this session will be 30 minutes approximately. There will be interaction of the poet with Professor Prabhakar. Before inviting them to the interaction, I would briefly like to introduce the poet who has already been introduced in this session. Beyond Here and Other Poems is the fourth compilation of Mr. Sethi. His previous poetry books, Where Shall I Go, My World of Words, and Beyond Feelings have received much appreciation and critical acclaim in the past. What makes the poetry of Mr. Pada remarkable is the appeal, an aura of mysticism, and a link to the unknown. There is somewhere a child ever wondering and ever asking questions. That's why I told that the poet is thirsty. You will find identities and emotions disappear with lines etched out in charcoal. His poems are all about life, but also about death. Guileless, innocent, sparkling, and at the same time, very disturbing and deep. The poet is a devout follower of Mahima cult, as you have discussed earlier in the session, and you will find the imprint in his poems very distinctly. He is one of the very few bilingual writers in the state who writes in English and also in his mother tongue, Odia. He is a distinguished bureaucrat, and I have been fortunate to work with him for so many years, and he has brought in so many innovations in governance. Born and brought up in a very humble rural setup, Vishnupada, through his hard work and determination, has carved his unique way out. I would add a very two lines to his introduction. If you have read his poems so far, and I know you have read, chances are bright that you have sensed the aroma of wild jasmine or feeling elated with the first shower of monsoon. I welcome you, sir, to the discussion, to the interaction with Professor Prabhakar. And regarding Professor Prabhakar, I would say that he teaches English in Swami Shraddhananda College, University of Delhi. He has got his PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and his thesis was Politics of Writing, a study of Dalits in Odia literature. His areas of interest include Dalit literature and post-colonial literature. His research articles have been published in reputed journals. He has edited Reading the Margins, History, Culture and Literature, which was published in 2020. He is also a translator and creative writer. Recently, some of his creative writings have been accepted for an Oxford University Press book project titled Dalit Writings from Eastern Regions. Before the discussion started today, I had the privilege to talk to Dr. Prabhakar for a few minutes, and he's smiling. I am welcoming both Mr. Bishnupada Sethi and Dr. Prabhakar Palak for a very fruitful, creative, and nice discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dwivedi sir. And good evening to Bishnupada sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Dr. Palak.
Yeah. This is a great opportunity for me to interact with you personally. Although I have seen you, at least 1 or 2 times in Odisha in some exhibitions together with Bhastrep Sunani. And I would like to thank Bhastrep Sunani for giving me this opportunity. And I also thank all other panelists and co-panelists who have spoken so well. And I think that has there's very little for me to speak, although I was supposed to speak for a while, then would interact with you. One thing that interests me or catches my notice is now the pandemic has entered into the literature, and I think you were one of the early ones to bring in pandemic into the literature, and that could be seen in a couple of poems in this particular collection. And first of all, I want to really congratulate you for bringing out. I have prepared, my presentation for around 6 pages, but I would skip that and would like to converse with you. So whether it is, I think there are a lot of poems on pandemic, and let me just try to trace it as I draw a deep breath beyond the lockdown, cheering up the brave hearts. And where are the children gone? And that I think touch of or the smell of the pandemic, either through the struggles of life or through the death, is very much visible throughout the poetry. So, and you are also the principal secretary of the Department of Disaster Management. So can you just share some of your thoughts which made you perhaps restless about the pandemic, and how those experiences led you to write some of the poems included in these collections?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Palaka, for asking me this question. But I think it will be an injustice if I don't thank the previous speaker, particularly Professor Rajakumar, Professor Armstrong, and Dr. Rajesh Karankal. And there was a beautiful recital by Anjali. And I'm grateful to you that you went through my poems and you had comments to offer. At the outset, I would also like to thank Bakul Foundation and particularly Sujit Mahapatra for organizing this event. I knew Sujit's father, an eminent anthropologist, very well. And I would like to say this in the beginning, so it will put me in a context. his father was an eminent anthropologist of this country, not only country, but the entire community of anthropologists worldwide, Dr. L.K. Mahapatra. Way back in 2003, when I was on a project as a part of United Nations Development Program to initiate a policy dialogue on resettlement of people, like, large number of people get displaced because of the development project. And when I interacted with some, senior bureaucrats in my state, one bureaucrat who was the key decision maker said that, he said, the poor are better than the rich in Odisha, and you don't really need a policy. Then I was really wondering. I thought, how such a learned person could make a statement that the how the poor are, better than the rich ones. Then he asked me a question. He asked, "Do you get a house under Indira Awas program?" I said, "No, sir, I don't need it." He said, "Do the poor people pay income tax?" Then he started shouting, and he said that the poor people don't study, they don't do any hard work, and out of the taxes that you pay, they are given doles by the government. It must be stopped, and poor had enough. We must not talk about the poor people in form of a resettlement policy. And for 6 months I really struggled to get a person who would agree to have a policy dialogue on resettlement issues. I met a very powerful person in those days, and he got introduced me, and he said that if anybody understands about the plight of the poor people, and particularly the marginalized tribals, it is Dr. L.K. Mahapatra. You must meet him. So I did not know Professor L.K. Mahapatra because I was a student of engineering. So I went and met, wherever Sujit's library now stands, Professor L.K. Mahapatra was seated on a chair, and I met. I had a beautiful discussion about how the poor people suffer. And when I offered him the key role of the consultant to make the policy, he said, "No, I will not be the right one to do that, because you must get a bureaucrat. Because if you have to really have a dialogue with the bureaucrat, then you must have a retired bureaucrat. They listen to each other better." So I started interacting with Professor L.K. Mahapatra, a great anthropologist. And when I was steering this resettlement policy, I had written, my first book was on Where Shall I Go? And that was the title of the book. I would like to read that poem. I think it will be also contextual. Bear me for 2 minutes. Where shall I go? Where shall I go, leaving this land for which I am only a trustee? As a tribal, I am duty bound to pass it on to the generation next. Who would shift the banyan tree and the village spirits lying underneath? What would happen to the streams singing praises in the names of God, and the rocks lying there, our monuments for ages? I will set my ancestors free, whose spirits I had installed in my home. I'm not sure if they won't be angry, as I failed to preserve things given to me. They were lucky. They knew no state, no king ever ruled them before. After I leave the land, they would yield the modern temple for making gold out of earth. A new era would dawn with promises of more happiness, and I know not for sure if it means anything to me and people like me. So this was my tribute to Professor L.K. Mahapatra. We worked together, and in 3 years' time, we made a policy which was one of the best in the country. Odisha was a pioneer to have a resettlement policy. So I would like to thank Sujit that he organized this, and through this I would also pay my tribute to a great human being, of Odisha, who really understood the pains of the poor people, particularly the tribal people, the indigenous people, and through his several researches, he had brought about the issues. Now, coming to the issue that Prabhakar said, during the lockdown and during the pandemic time, we know very well that it is the poorest who get the hardest hit. the region like Odisha, the Bengal, they used to be very hard hit by the famines in the year before independence. That British rule was designed to loot the country, and during British period, I think 60 to 70 millions Indian had died. There was a famine in 1866 in Odisha, and about one third of the population of Odisha died because of hunger, not being finding food and the diet. And that time there is an eminent poet of Odisha, is a saint poet Bhimo Boy, who is the preacher of Mahima religion. I think barely he must have been 16 to 18 years old then, and he wrote a stanza, a poetry, a poem, and that poem is now world famous. And our Sitakanta Mahapatra, a great poet of Odisha, had translated this poem. I would like to quote that he saw the pains of the people, those who were not getting enough food during that 1866 famine. He wrote, "Nothing to eat, nothing to wear, boundless is the anguish among the world's creature. Let my soul be condemned to hell, but the universe be redeemed." So during this pandemic, we saw, I think this is the worst in our lifetime, and the sufferings were immense. Unfortunately, our memories are very short. I'm sure all the people who are very sensitive and those who are present today, they would remember the images of people who travel long distance barefooted, someone on bicycle, someone on suitcases, the children on the suitcases, any many people succumbing to the heat, dust, din, and lack of food and care. So I
Right.
think those images were very disturbing. The life had come to a standstill. So I wrote few poems. I think those find place, like beyond the lockdown. There was a discussion on this. Then where have the children gone? Like
Yes.
you remember the children have the worst suffering in last 2 years. They have
Right.
not gone to the playground. They have not gone to the school. They have not met their friends, and many have become gadget savvy. And the children have suffered very badly. And similarly, like when we were cheering the brave hearts, like those doctors, paramedics, Asha, Anganwadi workers, so we
Right.
celebrated. So I wrote a poem on cheering their brave hearts. Similarly, as an ardent follower of Lord Jagannath, because all people of Odisha and the entire country, they believe that the Lord Jagannath, for last more than 1,000 years, he has seen all miseries, famines, all the cyclones, all drought, and people believed that Lord Jagannath must come out and see the plight of the people who worship him. So I had written a poem, "You must come out." Similarly, I also wrote a poem after there was a judgment of Honorable Supreme Court. The Rathatra was celebrated without the devotees on Badadand, that is the Grand Road, and this year also it is being celebrated the same way. And I had written that he came out of the temple. So I had dwelt upon some of those mythological issues, like for example, when the Lord of the universe come out of his temple and he rides and is on the chariot. Certain features which is full of certain the certain food item made for him, it is the punctured, the liquid is just the spilled. It is believed
Yes. There is a
that
poem on it. Yes.
yeah, the it is believed that the ghostly characters normally take that, and they really struggle for getting a little bit of it, and that is how they get the heavenward movement. If you have read that novel of Ishika Rai, you would also get a reference, how Lord Jagannath is important. She has written a beautiful novel after a lot of her researches. Lord Jagannath, intercede between this material world and the other world, and he really takes care of the people who are no more with us. So a few of the poems I wrote, but as I said, that the it has a lot of disturbing emotions on me. I not only I wrote few poems, but also I wrote a number of articles and I got them published.
Mm. Yes, but also I found that though you are bringing out the disturbing features of pandemic, but quite a points on pandemic are also very optimistic. Especially the determination of the migrant laborer to go and because I want to bring smile on my children. So that's the kind of I just would like to read that
In fact,
over the years.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
please.
the migration that the migrant worker are subjected to is not only a feature of this pandemic. It happens to them
Right,
every
right,
year. So I
right,
wrote in
right.
that fashion that it is recurring, that he's always on move, that
Hmm.
he did not move out for the first time.
Because
He
of
was
the
always,
pandemic.
it is an annual sojourn. He goes to from Odisha, from Nuapada, he goes to Andhra Pradesh, works in Bricklin, and every next day, he's on move for search of food
Mm.
and care and things for. It is his
Right.
life.
Right. So it's not just a pandemic, but as you take beyond pandemic, the journey, life as a journey is not just a pandemic compelling, but it's beyond that. Life
His
itself is a
life
journey.
condition is like that. He is always on
Right.
move.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And next, one thing, as you just talked about journey. So I think throughout this anthology, what I found is life as a metaphor or life as a journey. So journey becomes a very big metaphor in your poetry. Um, while you talk about celebrating life, you are also equally overwhelmed by the uncertainties of life and the power of death. And are there some experiences which developed your thoughts on life and death in this manner?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Palaka, for asking such a pertinent question. In fact,
Yeah.
the journey in this life has been a long one, and I think it has a lot of personal, as some of the speakers really talked about that it had to do something more about the personal life, like a person who was born in a small village, where there was no road communication, no buses, no trains, and the person in a child coming out of the village, going from a small town to a bigger town, landing up in Mumbai, then getting into civil service, then getting exposed to the life and culture of tribal societies, primitive societies, the
Mm.
cases of malnutrition, hunger, the allegations of starvation, and also the uniqueness and richness of culture. For example, in a district called Raigada, I came across with a tribal called
Well, I'm
Lanjias.
from Raigada district.
Oh, great! So there is a community called Lanjia Sora, and
Landia Sora. Okay.
you read a book, Peter Bertsky's, the Dialogue with the Dead. So you would
Right.
appreciate, how rich is the tribal culture. May they not be very rich materially, but
Mm.
the mantra they read, that they are in the tribal, the now that tribal society is not there because everyone has become a Christian. But 20 years before, when the Langia Sauraj were believing in those ancient faiths, so if somebody is aggrieved because there was a loss of life in that family, then the head priestess of the village would come and intercede between the world of dead and the person living. And there will be a painting drawn near the hearth of the house, and she would chant the names. And basically, the chanting of mantras means chanting the name of all the ancestors, and thereby she would get possessed. And like for
Mm.
example, if the mother, let's say the grandmother of the child has died, and the child need to talk to the grandmother, the grandmother is a spirit to descend on that priestess, and she would start talking to the child. So
Right.
those ancient faith, so there is a lot of richness, and that culture is not a few years old. It is more than 10,000, 20,000 years old. So when you get
And
exposed
very
to,
interestingly, even the voice of that spirit, sounds similar to that dead person.
absolutely, absolutely, it's
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. So for somebody who is going from a coastal area, they would say that it is primitive, this is superstitious. But if you really appreciate, sit down and appreciate by a keen observation, you would find a lot of
Yeah.
beauty to that, and that is the way of life you must respect. Like for example, if a tribal is worshipping a rock in Niyamgiri hills, you must respect, because he believes that all his ancestors are living there. So if you dispose him or throw him out of that place, he would feel that he has got the curse of those the ancestors, and he would lose mental peace, and he would live not very peacefully throughout his life. So a
Right.
lot of exposure to the uniqueness of our people, the culture, the diversities of our society, the dance, the songs, the music. Similarly, in the personal life, we saw the pride, the fall of the fall of the important people, egos, oppressions, deceptions. Then certain human way of doing things. So the great exposure that I had in my life had an impact. So that would lead to my thinking and writing down some poems. And
Mm.
each of the poem is just not just written on a day. Certain
Mm.
development would have a deep impact, and I would make them reduce. For example, once I was traveling in air to some place, and I came across a news that like in a school in Afghanistan, the children have been bombarded. They were all gunned
Mm.
down. And
Mm.
imagine the little child of 6 to 7 years, when the heavy gumboots must have been entering, and with those Sten guns, AK-47, what would be going through the minds of the children? And this
Right.
barbaric act, those people who indulge in this, they never had any, or if they had any children, what kind of people or insanity must be there in the head, that they wrote, they could do such kind of things. So such events had certain deep impact, whether I would remain sleepless for some time, and at the end I would, okay, I'll find some lines and I will make it as a poem.
Right. Right. But at the end of the day, I think your poetry celebrates life, as rightly pointed by Professor Rajkumar. Uh, Throughout the journey, of course, there is a kind of hovering of death, overpowering life. But at the end, you try to explore life. So life triumphing over death, and you celebrate life. That is, I think, amazing, and that's what you. I think that's a message throughout your poetry: is life triumphing over the spirit of death or death itself.
Yeah, Professor Palaga, if you see, I wrote a poem, I think page 118, you are not a whole yourself. So
Right.
this is
Yes.
about an advice to my child, who was once little depressed. And
Exactly.
I said, that after I am gone, I wish to be there in some bits of you. If you
Mm.
love me, look, my dear, this is the world created by the God, has
Right.
offers many, so much to live for, so much to wish for, so much to give and take. Everything is possible with His
Mm.
blessing. So I believe that
Right.
the world would perpetuate, and
Mm.
the good things should prevail. The truth will have its victory, and there will be always better things in life.
Right. And as you brought out your relationship with your son, and so my next question would be: there are quite many poems based on various themes of love. Love between a brother and sister in the form of tying Rakhi, and on the occasion of that day, and where is my brother, and those poems. Love of a son for his bereaved mother, and love for the beloved. So, are they, coming from your personal life experiences, and would you like to share some of those things? with the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Palaka. In fact, you are right that this had something to do with a personal tragedy, and how such a tragedy had an impact on the family members that I saw from very close. And the one poem that you said, on a special day, that is Rakhi, isn't it? Is it that you said
Right.
about?
Yes, yes,
That
yes,
is
yes.
page 90. So
Hmm.
this is this happened, once a day before the Rakhi, I had gone with my wife to the market, and as usual, like every year, she would go and buy some Rakhi for her brother. So that year, she also went and bought Rakhi, knowing fully well that certain tragedy had happened in the family. And after she bought the Rakhi, she burst into tears. And I too also could not control the tear, because that year her brother passed away for some, in a very tragic kind of a thing. So it had a deep impact on her, and she knew very well that the brother is not there, but as usual, she just went and bought the Rakhi, and after she bought it, there was a surge of emotion on her, and probably I have written down that, and
Hmm.
based on that death, a lot of things had happened, like her mother was affected, and you could see, where is my king, where is her
Yes.
brother.
Right.
So death, when you see death from very close, I think, and you that to being very personal, the person that you know very well and a deep impact on you, I think you get impacted. So I
Hmm.
think those poems had impact. They were because of the impact that the death had on us.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but the beauty of that is you are talking about a timeless relationship, even that continues beyond death. And it also says, but a symbol of a timeless relationship. They both need love and protection of each other. The pain in her soul and prayer in her tears connect each other through cosmic powers. Yeah. Even I think that relation that you rightly shared that continues beyond this earthly relationship. Yeah. Thank you. And one more question. As was also stated by Professor Rajkumar and others, so you have written book on Mahima Dharma, Mahima Dharma too. And are your ideas of time, space, even life beyond here on Earth influenced by Mahima philosophy? How do you see?
Yes, in fact, my exposure to Mahima Dharma started once I joined as a collector of a district called Subarnapur. That is incidentally the district where the principal preacher of Mahima Dharma, namely Saint Poet Bhima Bhoi, he had worked there for more than 20 years, from 1877 to 1895. And when I joined there, I was taken to the place, and I found that the place was almost in ruins. We did some work to restore that. It is an important place of pilgrimage now. So I had readings about the lives and the philosophy of Mahima Dharma, and you would appreciate that in Odisha there are a large following of Mahima religion, and particularly from the lower strata of society. And Bhima Bhoi lived at the same time as when the Brahma Dharma, Brahma religion spread, but it had no relationship with Brahmos or others who were also spreading the same tenets of life. So it was independently in Odisha, and Bhima Bhoi was preaching equality, He allowed freedom of women, and it was a kind of a movement which was against the rule of the king. King was very much opposed to him. He did not get patronage from king, and he was not seeking one. But 100 years, more than 100 years after his death, and his religion, his philosophy, his thoughts are becoming sharper. It is becoming brighter. It is finding more acceptance because it is universalistic. It is, it is over a time and space. It, like for example, those who follow Mahima philosophy, they did not, worship any idol. Like a simple illiterate person comes out of his house, he looks at the sky and prostrates, and he feels the universe. He feels the creator of the universe. Mahima philosophy means the God is so big, and the universe is the glory of God, and universe is so big that you cannot see, you cannot think about it, you cannot even comprehend about it. And imagine if something you cannot comprehend, and if there is a force or someone who has created this, it is much bigger than that. So a poor person understands that. He comes out of his house. He does not offer any puja to any small stone or wooden piece. He just comes out of his house and looks at the sky, and he feels about the vast expanse of universe and its creator. So there are simplicity in Mahima Dharma, and it is in tune with the today's requirement of society. It, like for example, when Mahatma Gandhi was teaching about meeting the needs of everyone, doing conservation. So Mahima philosophy is exactly like that. It is very human society, and Mahima philosophy also, that like the animates and non-animate. Everywhere there is the life, like the principles of Jainism and Buddhism. It is another religion which spread a lot of tolerance, and it allowed equality and freedom in Odisha. So,
Right.
Mahima philosophy is getting acceptance in Odisha. I think this is something which is good for the society.
It's wonderful, sir. I would just end with a few lines from the poem. As the time, gallops away, as the time gallops away, let's realize the limitations of our spaces and catch up with the speed of time. Drop what we don't carry, letting all thoughts of repentance go, making easy our hard feelings. In this beautiful universe, there is nothing more important than the time of togetherness. There is nothing more important than the time of togetherness we have at our disposal. Thank you very much. Nice talking to you, Vishnu Sethi, sir. It was nice talking to you. All the best for your future endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prabhakar.
Thank you, Dr. Prabhakar. Thank you, Mr. Bishnupad. And this was a beautiful interaction. Questions were beautiful, and so were also the replies. I would now request Professor Dasan to sum up. Before that, I will shortly introduce Professor Dasan, who was professor and head of the Department of English, Central University of Kerala. He has authored 9 books, including Anthology of Malayalam Dalit Writings, published by Oxford University Press. He has also published more than 50 research papers in international and national journals. He has been awarded the UGC Postdoctoral Fellowship and Shastri Indo-Canadian Fellowship, among others. I would welcome you, sir.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Hello?
Sir, please unmute. Dasan sir, please unmute.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Please unmute, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please continue, sir.
Dasan sir, please unmute.
Yes, I did. Can you hear? Okay. Sorry for the trouble. Sorry for the trouble. Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I thank the organizers for giving me a chance to bear witness to this significant event. Thanks to Dr. Bhastrep Sunani for giving me the chance. I have been personally listening to my former speakers about
Sir, unmute yourself. Kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So I don't want to repeat what my colleagues, friends has already said. I would only try to focus on the recurrent images in his poems, especially on the title poems. As all of us know, the term beyond is very significant, not only in the title, but there are so many other poems with the same title or with the same metaphor, beyond, appearing often. Beyond, as all of us know, would mean at or to the further side of something, or after a specified time or event, or the unknown, especially in reference to life after death. So I think, not only I know this Bishnupada Sethi after his conversation with my friend Palaka, otherwise I would not have misread the poems. Now, coming on the title as a person who personally had not the chance to know the poet, I would reflect on the images I read as a student of literature. We know that Indian English poetry has significantly recorded the experience and aesthetics of the Savarnas. It is only later, as academics, all of us are part in significantly contributing to bring in the experience of the other, the experience of the subaltern, the experience of the Dalits, the experience of the tribal into the discussion of English literature, especially in the experience of the other. All of us know that Gopal Guru has significantly contributed to this idea in his article, which is published in the collection called the Cracked Mirror. So I would see this collection of poems bring us the experience of the other But of course, it has, as a human being, it is a kaleidoscopic of images and experiences and reflections and imaginations as I see it. It has, as already been said, reflections on theme, love, frustrations, mundane themes, universal and metaphysical, experience of life and death and agony and ecstasy. I'm not speaking about that because already been spoken about that. Now, what I find is somehow or other, the poet seems to have asking for himself the answer to so many puzzles, questions, uncertainties. Some of the poems titled are clueless as to what will happen after death, what will happen after some time, about the space. I think he, like us, have no answer. At times he seems to console himself with the thought that I'm okay. Others criticize me, and he feels worried, frustrated, because he is forced to live according to the expectations of others, which is the experience of many subalterns, especially in civil services, bureaucrats, and people like us who are in higher academia. So this is the tension I find in the poet, which remains unresolved, even after one, I'm sure probably he will continue to write. An element of fatalism seems to be hovering over the entire experiential realm of this poet. Because he has written about Buddha, he has written about Gandhi, but Buddha's philosophy and Mohima philosophy seems to be a contradiction in terms of so many things. Buddha does not believe in soul or in God. When he was asked the question, he asked, why should you worry over, ponder over soul? Because we have so many other things to worry over. People are sad, people are in sorrow. Let's try to do something about that. So I think there is a kind of contradiction or tension in terms of the approaches to life. For example, he seems to be at times following the kind of Buddhist ideology or philosophy. Of course, as has already been explained, he has his own direct experience of Mohima philosophy and experience. But there I seems to be not being influenced by the Sramana or Lokayat tradition, which denies the existence of soul or sympathy. But of course, he shares the empathy, the karuna of the kind of Buddhist philosophy. For example, some poems beyond here, beyond the lockdown, beyond the time, so many a times hovering about life beyond, never know anything about beyond. So as I said, beyond is something which he seems to be wrestling with, which is a kind of imaginative, maybe trying to find solution for the unsoluble, which I think, of course, he has so many questions in his mind. There is another couple of words which repeatedly being used is questions, queries, identity, darkness, and clueless. For want of time, I am not reciting any of his poems. He wonders what that is connecting a real world of material sense to another realm of unknown. So if I'm permitted to be a little bit critical about this great poet, writer, administration, social, committed writer, instead of finding or worrying about afterlife, what will happen to me or any other human beings, let us be critical about ourselves as a person who has his own experience of working with the poor and the downtrodden, and who has imbibed a spirit of social commitment. I'm sure he knows that our identity is not what we decide what we are. One's identity is also determined by what others think about us. So it's not enough that I'm saying I'm okay. It also matters what others think about ourselves. So the solution probably lying back in a kind of Ambedkarist or Buddhist philosophy, a pragmatic philosophy in which we try in our own life to solve the problems rather than relying on a superpower, relying on an omniscient force, which of course Buddhism denies. It is in ourselves that we are thus or thus, to quote from Shakespeare. So my admission is that I do appreciate, congratulate the poet for, despite the busy schedule as a top administrator, bureaucrat, and social committed activist, he has found time to write poems in English. As I said, there aren't many English poetry, Indian English poetry, written in English by a person from such a background, which brings in a kind of experience which, as my former friends has pointed out, which need to be brought in the academia, which has already been sensitized to the mainstream Savarna experiences and aesthetics. Therein lies the significance of such a volume. And I'm sure it will come into the academia soon. So the queries and doubts, always he seems to be hovering upon the merciful God. Of course, he finds solutions saying that, yeah, this merciful God, how can he also create an ugly person? Because he himself had an experience, a hard experience of people finding fault with him unnecessarily, about his color, about his performance. But he finds solution, he finds solace in saying that, I'm okay. Whatever they can say, they can say. This is a kind of confidence, this is a kind of resilience which our people like him, has to show a model within. He has agonies, a silent revolt wages within his poem says. But he says, I am superb, I am beautiful. That's why I said, good, what else can we say? We are beautiful, black is beautiful. But all others say we are ugly. So this is the tension that I find in him, which is reflected in his poem. But still he says, hovering about life beyond as the time gallops away. So identity is a major theme which he seems to have reflected in his poetry. Given the chance to be critical about my dear poet, a great poet, I would say, let him probably rethink the subjectivity, the experience of people like him, as he himself I pointed out in the dialogue, that his empathy with the marginalized, his experience with the marginalized, the community. The poet wonders in the poem called Beyond the Time, what does the enlightened Buddha know? What does more he knew? Does he observe anything beyond the time? We don't count. The answer to many of the poet's dilemma, the answer to many of the poet's tension, the answer to many of the poet's confusion, doubts, probably, to me, seems to be found in the Buddha's teachings. Buddha rejected God, belief in the soul and karma. He condemned indulging in speculation as to whence, whither, and what am I. He repudiated the fatalistic view of life and the other equally foolish view that a God predestined as to what should happen for a man in the world. Buddha replaced the doctrine of moksha or salvation of the soul by the doctrine of nibbana, mind as a center of everything. So my humble submission to our dear, great, loving poet would be to find his path, his moksha, his marga, like all our marga, in the path Buddha has shown to the world. Love beyond oneself, family, and to imbibe karuna, rationality, dhamma, and not to worry about soul. Thank you very much once again for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dasan. You are just brilliant. Had it been possible for us, we would have liked to listen from you regarding Buddhism, cross currents, contemporary thoughts, and comparison of Mahima cult with Buddhism. We do not have time, but we would pray God that He will give us opportunity again, maybe some months later, that we would like to listen to you. Thank you so much. Now I would request my dear friend, an eminent poet of Odisha, a researcher on Dalit literature, Dr. Bhastrep Sunani, to give vote of thanks. But before that, I would recite my last poem quoting from Mr. Gibran, because so many discussants in this session have referred to the brilliant spark in the poems of Mr. Bishnupada, that is about the unknown, the element of unknown, playing of death and life in the same swing. The owl whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day cannot unveil the mystery of life. If you indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depth of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond. And like seeds streaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gateway to eternity. And trust beyond here and other poems. It is now your turn, Dr. Sunani.
Good evening to all. I'm so glad that professors of great repute like Professor Dasan, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Armstrong, Professor Rajesh Karankal, and Dr. Prabhakar Pallab, above all, the poet himself, Sri Govt Bishnupada Sethi, have elaborately talked about the recent published poetry book Beyond Here and Other Poems. I'm really glad to be a part of this great show amongst all the professors and critics. Nothing more to speak again, I think, on the book, but one thing I would say that Beyond Here and Other Poems speak about lots, many things. As Bishnupada Sethi sir told, first poetry book, Where Shall I Go? Where Shall I Go is a title poem of the book. In this poem, poet is narrating about the life of a helpless, innocent tribal person who has been displaced from his homeland. He has been displaced because some kind of development will be made through establishing mines. Therefore, he has to move elsewhere, leaving his ancestral homeland and asking, where shall I go? The readers can find many questions like, where shall I go? The poetry of Bishnupada Sethi, even in this book also, questions about life, questions about society, questions about environment, neighbors, so many things that has been elaborately, meticulously discussed we have heard from the professor's tongue. Someone has told once that whenever you start questioning to yourself and the society, then you are a part of the revolution. The journey of life itself is a revolution. Starting from being protagonist of the title poem, Where Shall I Go? He is finally reaching through his poetry to My Ego's Last Address, a poem of this book. That means from birth to death and from first step to last step of the journey, in between, the poet is continuing across with his childhood memories and the experiences of societal life, the love, affection, heart rate, ego, sorrows, and so many things that has already been discussed. Memories are always sweet, no doubt, but it is very difficult to pen down all these sweetness through words. However, poet Bishnupada Sethi has very successfully, very efficiently, very lucidly, very simply, and very innocently described his memories. Like, umbrella made up of palm leaves, which was a handmade devices village people were using in order to get rid from the heavy rain. Even I personally was using in my village. Again, collecting fish from the flowing rainwater was a very common scene of the villages. In order to eat that carcass, the vultures were visiting the villages. Now no vulture salute to their olfaction, smelling ability. Here, at least I also like to quote a line. I quote, a large number of tigers spirited black soared and floated in circle over the meadow. Believe me, I draw a deep breath, smell of familiar stains on me. Wonderful. So all such memories are not only poets, but I must thank poet Vishnupad sir that through his poetry I could see childhood memories also. My village scene, all these poems have made me not only young, but my white beard and my baldness with full of hairs on my head. Overall, what the poet Vishnupad tries to speak about through his poetry is life, long journey. All the speakers they have told, you don't know where are you going and where you will be reaching, but above all, life is a, I quote his poems, life is great gift. Do good. Monster would always be there, but won't rule over the earth. Yeah. Then what will rule over? It is the love, kindness, compassion. That is what poet Bishnupad Sethi, with much patience and courage, his advice who are coexisting in the society. I quote his poetry, no storm will last forever. Once Buddha has also told, nothing is permanent in this world. So I quote, no storm will last forever. What you do now will decide the future, unquote. Maybe even the above line is applicable to present pandemic situation. Definitely a corona pandemic has its own saturation. One day it will end and surely end. Finally, where shall I go? It's still a question for all of us in the great journey of our life. I will end with the first line of the first poem of the book, Beyond Here and Other Poems. I quote, where did my path begin? Where did my path begin? I can't remember. Where am I going finally? Not sure. Great sir. We all from this globe are really not sure where finally we are going. Thanks for the wonderful poetry. And I must thanks for the wonderful session, wonderful presentation by Professor Dasan, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Armstrong, Professor Rajesh Karankal, Prabhakar Palak, Dr. Prabhakar Palak, and Anjali Madam. Beautiful recitation with beautiful background music, and Shailendra ji, and the organizer of this event, Sujit Mahapatra, and above all, the poet Bishnupad Sethi sir. I'm thankful to Rajesh Karankal and Professor Dasan that after going through the poetry of Bishnupad Sethi, they have really thought of to include this kind of poetry in the academia, in the university. So I'm really thankful to them. And professor like Rajkumar and other people, they have told that they have not read before the book of Vishnupad Sethi. So we will try definitely to make the book available with them, and hopefully they will consider for the further needful action. Really, from my core of heart, I thanks to all the panelists for their beautiful words, beautiful presentation, wonderful session. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you all. And I must thank to all the audience. Thanks to the viewer who are actually beyond this screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
You know,
you.
in
Thank you,
education
Sir
that we are trying to
Karaka.
promote reading. As statistics say, if 50% children in grade 5 cannot read the textbook of grade 2, then what is really happening? That's because the basic skills of reading and writing is not there. So we thought that if we have to change this cynicism, then we need to demonstrate what is possible with small contributions. So that is the idea basically that Bakul is trying to demonstrate, what is possible entirely with volunteerism, entirely with small little contributions. We asked people to contribute books to set up a public library in Bhubaneswar, and a children's library was set up in Bhubaneswar, and now that children's library has become a general library, a public library with more than 20,000 books. So that is one of the major things. Another major area of intervention is environment. A lot of environmental education, but through films and through creative methods. So we have a traveling film festival on environment. We go to schools, colleges, apartments and screen films on environment, primarily on climate change and on issues of water and sanitation, two issues that we're working in. And at the libraries also, we conduct a lot of workshops on creativity. You know, we all want the world to be a better place, and we have our own ideas of how it can be better. The thing is, can we all start in some small way towards addressing that? Can we say that in some small way, this world is the way I want it to be because I have done something about it?